people are joining, and I want to just say welcome, you guys, Troy and Gail. This is just such an honor to share this space with you, and huge day for you both. So emotions are welcome, tears are welcome. You know,
God, because I'd have to just put a big black screen in front of me otherwise.
No.
All right. I have to tell you a really quick story. So I was doing some promotion for my magazine, and so I was talking to this writer, this young guy, and he was answering questions, and his face just sort of like locked into a smile, and it's like his face sort of got stuck, and he was like, and I'm like, "Are you okay? Are you what?" And he like dropped the phone, and I'm like, "Oh my God!" I'm like, "Can you call 911?" I'm like, "Aaron," I'm like, "What's going on?" And it turned out he had a seizure while we were on the phone.
Oh my God.
Oh, he had epilepsy. I had no idea. And his wife ended up coming out, and she, oh, this is very normal. I thought the guy had a stroke and might have died. So,
oh my God.
This is exactly the same thing that happened to Elisa Kennedy Jones, my publisher.
Oh, that's right.
2.5 years ago or something, she had a grand mal seizure during a Zoom meeting, and she says she always says she cosplayed Marie Antoinette because she nearly cut the carotid artery as she fell down. I mean, it was a disaster, but anyway.
But it's like to the guys that he was all embarrassed, and I'm like, well, I cry and I can't control it. It's kind of the same thing, and I got fired from my college job because of that. It's kind of like, things that just happen that are part of being in a body, it's funny. I'm going to just try to turn this. No, that doesn't work. Okay, never mind.
Well, while you're situating, I just want to let people know, for whatever community is there, I see names that I recognize. So welcome, everyone. Troy and Gail both, it's pub day for both of them. So, and know that they may be going to a pub too, but what it means is that two of their books are being published. And for Troy, Lamb has made its debut into the world after serializing it on Substack. And it is such a tender story of manhood. I mean, and identity and the tenderness that can be part of that story, and friendship. My God. So I'm thrilled to have Troy here. And we have this theme here because Gail, Boyhood Reimagined, a collection of essays to help young men realize that there's other ways to be in this world. So, and then I'm plugging our project collectively. The three of us have been working on a short film, 35-minute, beautiful short film that also examines how we live in these boxes and the cost of those boxes that we live in, and celebrating queer identity. And yay for Pride Month. So welcome, you two. That's my background.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting us, Kim. It's absolutely lovely of you to do so.
Yes. Well, I want to begin just because I know this is an exciting day for you. How are you guys celebrating today? Just let me know. What is there one thing that you have done or will be doing today to celebrate the launch of your book?
Gail?
I'm going to pick my books up because they've been anyway. No, that's a good question, Kim. I there's been so much heartache, and last night I said to Aaron, tomorrow is celebration. That's the theme. I am not gonna let any of those blood, sweat, and tears, which are totally normal, a normal part of a project, overwhelm the celebration, because it's really important. And I had a really nice moment where I was writing to my contributors, and I sent them the Galway Canal poem about St. Francis and the Sow, and this idea of loving something so that it can, I can't remember the phrase, but like, we have to honor these things that were not in the world and now they are. Like, that's a miracle. And to just welcome our book into the world. And I love just taking that quiet moment to write to my contributors, because they've been amazing people to work with. And I just encouraging them to celebrate and to tell them I'm proud of them. So that was that, and eating a scone, a chocolate chip scone.
Troy, I love that idea of, because we don't often put creations on the same level as human birth. And for me, I'm not a mother in the traditional sense. I'm a stepmother, but to honor things coming into the world that may not necessarily have come from our womb is really, really special. And obviously, Troy, you are mothering stories into the world. And so I love that reframe that you just offered us.
Yeah, I we Leo and I went out to dinner last night to celebrate because I knew I'd be doing this tonight, and it is 7 o'clock here in Sita, Spain, and so we didn't want to do anything tonight. There were other things going on as well, so we had a nice thing. But I will say, it's here. It feels like, a momentous, and it feels like a relief in a lot of ways, but I'm feeling a little like, is numb the right word? It's been so long coming, and I've worked so hard to get here, and it's just been, I mean, for so long, a dream, that now that it's here, it just kind of feels surreal. It hasn't really hit me yet. And so I'm just allowing that to be, my current reaction, and not trying to force it or anything. But I absolutely appreciate, all of the well wishes. I got an e-card from Gail earlier today, which was so cute. And lots of people reaching out on email and Instagram and Substack, for my first book, which is near and dear to me, my first published book, I should say. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you guys feel like this process has changed you? I know, Gail, you've published before, so maybe that's a little less relevant, but I know a lot of people are joining and probably are like going, wonder if I'm going to publish a book someday. And so maybe, how has this process changed you? And you can talk about that in the process of like publishing or in the actual content of your books, because I know we're exploring sort of these themes of identity today too. And so maybe there's some questions that arose while like you were writing Lamb. Troy, you're such a tender-hearted soul. I have to believe that Lamb is an extension, a little bit of you or your heart.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people have been asking me that lately about, just how much of Lamb is drawn from real life. And, the truth is a lot. A lot of the scenarios, a lot of the scenes and people and so forth, were, there's a kernel of truth in all of them. And so I think in a way, I had such a difficult time all through my teenage years, and even my 20s and my 30s and 40s. You know, um, Writing fiction is a way for me to talk about a lot of things that happened to me and happened to people like me, gay people in general, queer people in general, and which I still, even at 55 years old, I don't always have the ability to talk about them. Even with my most intimate, my husband or my friends or whatever. I find it incredibly difficult, because I think it just feels so crushing at times, or at least it felt crushing at the time. And so writing fiction and drawing these things out of myself and taking the time to write about them and really examine them slowly, rather, unlike when you talk to somebody about something, you're in the moment, and you're searching. Even now, I search for the words, and it's like a roulette wheel, and it's very fast. But I feel like in fiction, I have the opportunity to really examine something and turn it in, all different directions and see how I feel about it. So for me, writing fiction, writing Lamb, is very therapeutic, in finding, expression for things that I haven't been able to talk about in real life. So
Yeah.
so
Gail, what about you? I'm curious because, your essays, I would imagine, are largely drawn from your experience as a mother and working with your son and watching him grow up. Um, has writing this collection changed some of the ways that you look at your son or your own masculinity?
Well, I just want to go back to something that Troy was saying, this idea of fiction. There's something about fiction that I think enables us to go deeper in the truth than nonfiction. And I say that as someone who writes both.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that so interesting that there is something about a story. There's something about allowing ourselves to imagine and to join the imagination with the lived experience that lets us touch the truth in a more potent, immediate, visceral kind of way.
Mm.
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 I'm almost exclusive. That's not true. I still write essays on Substack, but my passion is still fiction. And I'm grateful to have done, like, this collection has meant something very different to me than what you're talking about, Troy. I think it has more to do because this is a collection by many different authors. I have two pieces in the book, but it's mostly by other writers, and the idea of looking at a topic together for a collective lens, especially something like working on healthy masculinity and raising boys in a way that's different than what we're seeing, especially with the roaring, what do you call it when something backlash, this roaring backlash that we have now going on,
Mm.
in this sort of story of masculinity that we haven't yet created or found or identified this healthy version of being masculine. What does that mean? And it's not easy because I think even just defining what is masculine versus feminine, well, that's
Yeah.
not clear. There's, some of the women in the collection, a lot of us talk about this idea of our sons. They all need to wrestle and they all need to, like, grab a stick and, like, whap it against things, and that the girls tend not to do that. But, that's a trend, not
Yeah.
not sort of everything, but that's something. So what do we do with that energy? Because that is part of who we are as people. We have to have a place for it. We can't just call it bad and aggressive, and we don't want that energy.
Yeah.
It's part of us. We have it.
Absolutely. And a part of what made us survive for, thousands of years. I was just in Colorado visiting family, and my brother had just gotten back from a men's retreat. And it was interesting because we were talking about this idea of toxic masculinity. And he was saying how, someday these men's retreats and these women's retreats maybe will be masculine retreats and feminine retreats, because he's like, I know some women that are more masculine than some men. And so it's like, why are we, once again, putting these genders into boxes when I think some women I know are really demonstrating a healthy masculine in the way that they're mothering, even, So it's like we need to just blur the lines.
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's
yeah.
hard. Yeah.
Mhm.
Gail and I were talking about this, a week or two ago, I think, and talking about how, I'd be curious to know more about, your brother's, men's retreat, because in a way there's so much is made about men being strong, and, and I think that a big part of the fear of examining the feelings, examining the impulses and so forth, that, you know, we people in general, whatever, are labeling toxic masculinity. There's a fear that by letting go of some of that stuff, that they will become weak, And so we were talking about, where is the sort of the equivalent of feminism for men? Where do we find, strength and empowerment for men that doesn't involve, um, um, degrading other people, degrading women, degrading, queer people or whatever, you know what I mean? And so I wonder if, I don't know what your brother experienced at that, but it would be interesting to know.
Well, it's interesting because Sean Talbot just joined. He was at that retreat.
Oh,
And I don't know Sean, but I remember my brother mentioning that there was someone at the retreat that reads your Substack. And I was like, what? Who? So, hi, Sean.
right.
Nice to meet you. But yes, it was a gathering of 40 men. And I don't want to speak for Sean or for my brother, but I know that there has been, for example, my brother, Eric, is 6'6". We call him Yeti because he is, sort of that.
Eddie.
And he has had to um shy away from some of his masculinity just because how he presents when he walks into a room. So for him, some of this is actually giving himself permission to be big and aggressive and dominant and like to step into some of, I think he's very good at doing the soft stuff. And he lives in Boulder, so it's okay there. But to just, wrestle, and I know they did wrestle because he tore his ACL while they were wrestling. So boy, I wish we could bring Sean in and hear his experience.
But like, I think that's why we he's good at both.
Nice.
No, but that's the thing. I think progressive movement has not been very good about that. Like we haven't found a way and a place to honor the soft and the hard, the loud and the soft. And so I think that's why we're seeing all these younger men gravitating toward the right because they're saying it's fine over here.
Yeah.
You can be that over here.
Yeah.
And I think it's to find a social place for all of that is, and I think men, like women needed to be the leaders in the feminism. Men have to be the leaders. There's a really wonderful organization in Canada called Next Gen Men, and that's exactly what they're doing. And I'm with them on a little thing for this book, but I've been reading their newsletter for about 2 years now since I started researching stuff for this book when I was writing the introduction. And that's what they are working on. They are working on creating a new masculinity, a healthy masculinity where all of the masculine is welcome, including the feelings and all of that, but we're not about oppressing and hurting and everything, but where people like your brother. Is it your brother that you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, who you can take up as much space as you have, and you can step into whatever power is there, and masculine has to do with that.
Yeah, and that can be loving. That can
Yes.
be, it doesn't have to be dominating. It can be loving.
Right.
It's interesting. Amy just made a great comment. She said, I reject the terms masculine and feminine because behaviors are not gendered. They are used as substitute terms for behavior we value versus those we don't. That's a fascinating point. And it makes me think a lot about Unsung, the 4 individuals that, including you, Gail, that were in the film, who are, on, we asked them to identify themselves, and it's like, well, okay, our labels, whether it's queer or bi or polyamorous or whatever in this film, it was a placeholder for them to identify with the community and to root themselves. But then it's time to shed. And I found all 4 of you at one point or another said it's really not about the labels. It's not about that at all. And it was so humanizing to hear that, because I think here I'm coming as an ally to, same with Unfixed, to people that may have their, need their voices to be heard and sung. And so, and to hold spaces for those stories. So I'm listening to you and Troy as a cisgender heterosexual woman, and realizing that so many people still don't understand that the labels aren't what people are looking for. They're actually looking to be free of the labels. Is my interpretation correct? What would you guys say about labels, whether masculine, feminine, bisexual, whatever?
I was really interested. I saw Amy's comment pop up, rejecting the terms masculine and feminine, because I couldn't help but think to myself when you said, "Oh, your brother went to this men's retreat or whatever," and I thought to myself, aren't the goals the same? Aren't isn't ultimately the goal of all people the same as it? And I wonder, I wonder if and when or whether we will ever reach the point where there's no longer women's retreats and men's retreats. There's no longer straight people and gay people. Cis het or trans or whatever. You know what I mean? And people are just people, and dominance is not the force that it is now, but instead what's a word I always think of, like I always think in terms of, so we have capitalism, and then we have cooperation. You know what I mean? Like I'm always trying to find these terms that kind of make something that is currently in our world, a sort of a toxic force, and turns it into a cooperative force. So what's instead of domination, we have leadership.
Yeah.
Hmm?
Or protect.
Yeah, protection. Mm-hmm.
Perhaps. I mean, I maybe, but I also think that there's plenty of women that could protect me. I've I'm not and especially aggressive. I'm not an aggressive person really at all. But I just think that there's a point at which we and that's probably very idealistic and centuries in the future maybe. But I tend to agree with Amy that that the dichotomy is so firmly entrenched in our minds. I love more and more. Let's see, two or three people actually in Unsung identify as non-binary,
Mm.
and I love that people are now stepping out of that binary and are imagining themselves in a lot of ways as more holistic, more whole, and beyond those labels that seem to kind of box people in a lot of the times.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, what Dahlia in the film said, for me, queerness is about freedom to be yourself. And they want that for everyone. They want everyone to come to the party. This is the most inclusive community, I think, that, truly, even at the, not to give spoilers away, but Eris at the end talks about how he's grateful for even those who want his erasure, because it's showing him just how far they've come and how resilient they are and how they've survived and will continue to survive. So there is a graciousness and an inclusivity that I think is where ultimately the human race, hopefully the human species, will eventually be moving towards, which is that we don't have these boundaries and these labels that we have to put everybody in order to connect and understand one another.
And to try and perform, when it's not always a good fit. Very often it's not a good fit, and I think that's um, you know, trying to outperform each other is a, a big part of the toxic masculine or toxicity in general. So
Yeah.
but I go ahead, Gail. Sorry.
No, I was just going to jump in and say, I also think, just as a counterpoint, somebody posted about Ocean Vuong, who we cite in our introduction. And I think that the other side of this is, I think we're not done with these categories. I think as a species, they're important to us in some way that's fuzzy and unclear,
Mhm.
but still, I think we quoted Ocean Vuong, and he said something like, we're not finished with masculinity as a destination, because for many people it has meaning. And what we don't want is to let dominant culture or capitalism define it so rigidly.
Yeah, we still need to flesh out the definition.
Yeah, and there's something vital in the masculine or the feminine that has nothing to do with the stuff that we're being fed, but we're exploring it as a species, and we're not kind of finished with the explorations. And I don't think he's talking about necessarily like men versus women, but the masculine essence or the masculine energy and what that means, especially I'm guessing not as a trans person, but as a person who identifies as a trans man specifically. Like, that's a person who values that identity in a particular way. So I think it's not nothing.
No.
I think, it's important not to erase people either. You know what I mean? Who feel very strongly one way or the other. You know what I mean?
I mean, I feel like a woman, like, that's for sure. Like, I don't identify as non-binary. And yet when I was a little kid, I was very masculine, and I was like always wanting to wrestle, and I was mistaken for a boy constantly. And I hated that, and I hated all of it, and I rejected my own masculinity as I kind of came of age. So, like, what the fuck is that about? You know, like it's a weird thing, but it's definitely the masculine and the feminine are energies, and their energies and their identities. And where does it get harmful? And that's, I think, maybe where the work is.
Well, and as long as we're in a culture, which is, forever, we cannot help but be influenced by the culture and the generations before us. Right. So we need healing. We still need masculine and the feminine still need healing. And, in an ideal world, like even my brother and I were in this same conversation. He's like, well, why do you need a publisher that only represents women? And I'm like, because we've been, those voices have been silenced for so long. So we can't separate, this exploration of masculine and feminine from the culture and the history that we are in. So it's a long-term project.
It is. And we're certainly not going to solve it today.
Are you kidding? What?
Among the three of us.
Bring on the books. Bring on the film.
Yeah.
We're done.
But, that's one of the reasons I find fiction is so much, I don't say it's easier for me, but I'll say that I feel more comfortable in fiction because there is so much ambiguity there, and there is so much, there's so much up to interpretation, because I also personally don't feel at all comfortable making pronouncements. I don't know how sometimes people go, in the nonfiction space, in the, on Substack even, a lot of people, they make really solid, is very certain pronouncements, and I just don't feel capable of doing that. You know what I mean? I can see so many different perspectives and arguments for this way and that way and so forth, and I don't feel capable or competent even to make those kinds of pronouncements. In fiction, though, I can explore it, and I can play out scenarios and show feelings and nuances that that don't have to be set in stone, but can but it's a play, it's a dance between the writer and the reader, and I really feel so much more comfortable in that space personally.
And you explore it with such nuance with Lamb. There are so many layers to this young man's becoming. I hear how that medium of fiction really assisted you in exploring those different layers of him. Yeah. I feel like I know him, and I feel like I want to, from the second chapter, it's like, I just want to invite him over and give him a big fucking hug, because boy.
Yeah. I will say that I don't think, I want to say, I don't know if you've read the bonus material that I included in the published version. Have you both?
I have. It's been a while. I read it right when you sent it out, so it was a while
It's
ago.
called The Fire Road, and it's an extended short story written by Lamb, the title character, and it explores, and it shows a different side of him, and I kind of, I went back and forth with it because it is significantly different than what was published on Substack, and um, I wanted to show that different side of him because there is inside of that, that feeling of powerlessness, let's say, or vulnerability or whatever. There is sometimes some very dark and aggressive feelings. And in The Fire Road, I won't go into details about, what happens in it or whatever, but Lamb absolutely shows that side of himself, which is very angry and which is very, feels wronged and, and doesn't just accept it, but in his telling of this story within a story, he reveals a side of himself which isn't quite the tender, sweet, character that a lot of people felt so strongly for when they were reading the serial
But
at
I
Substack.
love that. You made him human.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to understand that is also the violence and the anger and the resentment and all of that is, I mean, how do we relate to somebody if those pieces aren't there? And so I'm relieved that was also a part of him. What about Gail in your boyhood? I know you have 2 stories in there. Do you explore kind of that holistic, the spectrum of emotion, or
Very different. It's more sort of slice of life. One of my pieces is about my son when I think he was about 3, and he went through this phase where he got obsessed with domestic tools. So like he started he the first thing he was the salad spinner. So like it rolled out of the cabinet.
Who doesn't love a good salad
I
spinner?
love a good salad spinner.
So on the spectrum like I am, and anyway, he was just like he sat in his pen with the salad spinner literally hours, like, pumping, and like I could not get the thing away. I like had it. I was not able to clean it because he had the thing, and then he got obsessed with the vacuum cleaner, and such to the point where every time we would get it out to clean the house, we couldn't clean the house because he wanted to hug it and he wanted to push the buttons and he wanted to have it sitting on the rug near his play area and his bear, and he wanted to like talk to it and read it a story, and it would like anyway.
Wow.
So
That's adorable.
hid it in the bathtub at one point, and and we got him a toy substitute, which he liked, but he didn't like it quite as much as the real thing. And then finally I got out my broom and dustpan, and of course he became obsessed with that. So, the whole thing is like me sort of being like, I should be thrilled about this because here's this little boy really obsessed with women's work, but I'm so bored having to do it myself. The last thing I want to do is to accompany an edgy toddler while he does it all really slowly. So, that's sort of a funny piece about
That's
that.
adorable. I love that he gravitated to the 2 things that my cats hate the most in the house. The salad spinner and the vacuum.
Really funny.
Yeah. Cats are afraid of cucumbers.
Yes.
But I think
Yes.
it's up for debate.
That's strange.
But the second essay is a little more serious. It's about my son's relationship to my new partner, who he identifies as non-binary, but he was assigned male at birth and identifies out in the world as a male, or he is seen as a male. And it's really about this questioning of like, so my son has 2 moms. He was raised by 2 moms, but there was something he wanted from a person in a body that looked like his. And when Aaron came on the scene, Alexei just glommed onto him and sort of like exploring the dynamic of, well, does that mean we failed? Does that mean we don't have what it takes? Does it mean that queer women can't parent a son? What does it mean for our relationship with him and the family that we started with and his and so that was a little bit more serious. But again, I think it's the collection as a whole is where the impact is of this book. I think the essays, when you look at some of the themes that are threaded throughout, like the fact that all of these queer women, most of whom identify as feminists, are parenting these boys. Most of them have this need to wrestle, need to like pick up sticks and whack things. And like, how do we, one of the women was saying, I don't want to be around wrestling. I don't want to be around things like sticks that are like, I have to send my more masculine partner in to kind of pinch hit because I don't want to deal with energy. But our boys, they want to interact with us with that energy. So what do we do? How do we meet them where they are?
What do you do, Gail?
I learned to wrestle. I mean, when I was a kid, I actually was more like that than my friend Jen, who was in the collection. But sometimes I just didn't friggin' feel like it. I just wanted to, like play Scrabble, and that was not where he was. He play Scrabble now, but he had a very strong need to be physical and to engage with us physically. Like there was a bonding instinct that was inherent in that part of him. And I think there were a lot of the women talk about that and how it was a little foreign to us.
Yeah. Troy, did you have that as a kid? Do you remember?
No. There was no aggressiveness at all when I was a kid. I didn't want to wrestle. I didn't want to play sports. My mother tells a funny story about. So I was adopted, and that's something that Gail and I have talked about because the character in your first novel was adopted. Is that right? Isn't that right? Yeah. And so my mother tells a story that when they brought me home from I was like 3 weeks old or whatever, foster care or whatever like that. But they said for the first many months that they had me, they kind of thought that something might be wrong with me because I didn't make a fuss and I wasn't like super, wiggly and active and everything like that. It's that I just stared and watched, like, what was going on. She was like, eventually I started, I walked at a normal age and I talked at a normal age and all that kind of stuff. But when I was, a little baby, it was just like, I was just a pair of eyes, like watching everything. And that's kind of carried on my whole life, and actually some of the, obviously I encountered a lot of that more aggressive energy when I was younger and I did not rise to meet it. And I think that was kind of an early departure from me from that energy and why, especially why I think I was bullied. I was marked as different when I was a kid was because a lot of the time I was like, I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't expecting the aggressiveness and I wasn't expecting, the, that energy that you were talking about, Gail. And so I didn't know how to react to it. I didn't expect it. And I was just kind of like waiting for more information, you know, and I totally get, and I understand, Sean's comment from before, that, I can see why a little boy, for example, who has that kind of energy and finds, someone to engage in it with, in a man and a father and in whomever, you know what I mean? How that could create an absolute bond. But that was not my experience. And, and it was seen as a bad thing that I always wanted to, I found it fascinating to hear women talk. You know, the I found it fascinating to see them, work and do things that, were quieter and maybe more intricate, you know what I mean, than sports and stuff like that. And that was seen as a very bad thing, from the get-go by my father, and my mother was kind of odd. Like she liked my presence, but she was afraid of what it meant. And so there was always just this, like, I wasn't one of the boys. I wasn't one of the family. I was kind of just this alien creature. I sometimes really do think I've come from another planet.
It's so interesting to have the two of you here, because here you are saying, Troy, when you were growing up, there was a little bit of, well, especially when you're an infant, what's wrong with Troy? And then here, Gail, you say that exact same thing in Unsung, the film, but what's wrong with Gail? People were saying, the opposite, because you weren't behaving like a girl, and Troy, you weren't behaving like a boy. And so immediately parental figures are saying, what's wrong with them? And I wonder how that messaging, what if that messaging hadn't been there, how that would have played out differently in your lives, if you never had a notion that something was wrong with you.
Well, and I think when I hear the parents of the moms in the book, when they're talking about their sons, the thing that they talk about, they want their kids to be free. They want their kids to be seen. They want whoever they are to be okay. You want to wear a dress to school? Do it. You want to love the color pink? Do it. You want to cut your hair in 5 different lengths? Go for it. They want that kind of freedom and acceptance.
Yeah.
And it's what's kind of ironic, not universally, but almost all of the moms in the collection, their boys tended to present as very mainstream, cis, kind of heteronormative, at least at the young ages that they are. But and it's a funny thing to relate to that. Like, several of the moms were talking about how their sons came out to them as straight, and how the sons are like reticent to talk to. I'm kind of nervous to tell you this, Mom, but I like girls, and like this thing that we're hoping, that's right, is so horrible. But and I don't necessarily think that the moms were hoping their kids would be gay. I don't think it's like that. I think
No,
you just want them free. And one of them was saying, I have a video series where I'm asking pretty simple questions. And what was your response when you found out you're having a boy? And this one woman was saying, I was kind of expecting to be disappointed, but frankly, I was just relieved. She said she was traveling and she was imagining her son traveling, and she was thinking, he can travel anywhere. He can go wherever he wants. He's not going to be harassed. The whole world is his oyster. And she just felt this sense of relief
yeah.
at that, which is an interesting reaction.
Well, that, Eris talks about that. One of the individuals in Unsung, trans, popular, loved high school girl, and then realizes that there's this thing called binary, and is like, oh my gosh, I resonate so much more with that. But had and that he reveals in the film that mom was afraid of him being abused, and mom had also been abused, and so being a woman in this world is a scary thing, or at least that was the messaging that Eris got. And so how much did that even influence this desire to be able to walk down an alley and not be threatened? Like, again, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, the culture is also very much influencing these decisions that we make, even if it's on an unconscious level.
For sure. How could it not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I walked to the bakery just to get my little treat today, and I was walking home, and they're working on the house down the street. And the guy with the one of the construction workers was sort of whistling along with his music, and then he stopped, and I was like right in front of him, and he did a cat call, and I'm like, "Are you freaking kidding me? Are you absolutely out of your mind that this is?"
What did you do, Gail? What did you do? Did you flip him off?
I ignored it because I'm partly deaf anyway. So it could, it could have been, but I just was like, I can't even, I wasn't even offended. I was just sort of incredulous. Like, this is still happening. Like, yeah, if I had a male body, that wouldn't have, something else might have happened, but that wouldn't have happened.
I mean, gay men suffer something very similar in and I grew up in the 80s and even into the 90s. And still, I'll say this, still to this day, and I'll say Sitges is an incredibly gay town. It's widely known. It's like the Fire Island of Europe, and people come from the States and from Australia and from all over Europe, everywhere, Canada, to come to the Bear Weeks that we have. We have a Bear Weekend in May. We have a Bear Week in September. We have a very well-known Pride Festival here. I see men walking down the street all the time holding hands, women too. But it is something that I still carry with me from when I was younger, that a cat call of of having faggot screamed out at you from across the street, across the schoolyard. It was not a constant refrain, but it happened often enough that even today, years, decades later, I still can't get over the feeling of being self-conscious. I don't want to walk down the street holding my husband's hand, even in Sitges, not because I don't want to, but I've said this before. It's like I go into fight or flight mode. I go into this incredibly almost dissociative experience where I am just constantly scanning for, dirty looks or little comments aside, or even for the scream or the confrontation or whatever, and it's, I mean, I've, a lot of people would say, well, just get over it, or, go with therapy or whatever. Well, I've done all of that. You know what I mean? And it's still there. It's ingrained in me because of, what I went through when I was younger. And I just I've had to accept that. I've had to, learn how to not feel shame about that, as much as anything else, so
I
the
think
cat calling is real.
that was more common. I mean, I have a similar thing. When I was in the car, I was living in Boston at the time, and I was making out with my girlfriend, and it was at night. We were just outside of one of the women's clubs, and our car was surrounded by these men, these young men, and they were pointing, shouting things, and they were starting to sort of like approach the car. And like just when something was about to happen, a police car just like came down the street and they scattered. But there's no, like, that is a strong memory. I'm not a person that remembers a lot. I have a terrible memory, but that I remember that. And
yeah, those things stick. And even if there's not a physical memory, like Amy just said, this is trauma. This stuff lives in our body. And so we may just have the parasympathetic reaction and not even have it tied to a memory. But all of this is,
and a lot. I mean, I think it's still happening. I think it's still happening,
It is.
And if you don't have white skin, it's going to happen a lot more. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
Totally.
I want to take these last 4 minutes, you guys. Is it going to cut us off right at the hour? Does it do that? Or
No, it doesn't cut us off, but
okay.
People, yeah.
But you can.
But I want it before that happens or whatever. I just want to honor how amazing it is to connect with with the two of you, and this collaboration that Troy, you planted the seed a year ago to do a film together. Gail and I had already done an interview together, and we fell in love, and we're like, why can't you be my neighbor? And then, so when you had this idea, Troy, instantly we're like, bring Gail on. And a year
Gail was the first person on both of our lips.
Yeah. But to be able to, Substack created this place for us to connect across borders, across identities, across everything, and to create together. And I just feel like that is just so magical. We've never been in the same room together, but we created, you guys wrote your books, we created a fucking film together, and it's just, that is just magic. So
it is magic.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for both of you. You have such amazing energy, and I'm not a particularly online person, but this is really so satisfying, and it feeds the soul. And I can't imagine spending my pub day doing anything else that I would rather do than this. I'm doing a launch with my collaborators later, but it's sort of the perfect two event.
Yeah. Yay.
Thank you so much, Kim, for hosting us today. It was very, very sweet and special of you to do that.
Of course. Absolutely. So everyone that's still with us, stay tuned for the end of the month because our film is coming out. It is premiering the last weekend of Pride Month. And get your box of Kleenex because you will cry and you will laugh and you will just want to go have a dance party and celebrate your own freedom, whatever that looks like, because it is a real celebration of being human. So, yeah. And go to Amazon and buy Troy's book, Lamb, and Boyhood Reimagined with Gail, and any other way that you can support these two incredible artists, because I love them dearly and they are just beginning to share extraordinary work. So you got to keep your eye on them.
Kim's book is coming soon too.
Oh yeah, mine too.
We'll have to do something like this again when your book is coming out.
I would love that. I would absolutely love that. I'm getting little emails about the tour right now, and it's just been really cool stuff. Tour themes. So maybe I'll stop in your town. I don't know, but if they'll take me over to Spain, but
Ottawa. Come to Ottawa.
Yeah, Ottawa would be great.
Cool.
All right, love you guys.
You too.
Love you too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.